hello everyone, and welcome to TNPA's What I Wish I Knew webinar panel. My name is Shelby Truxon. I'm the director of the internship experience here at the Nonprofit Alliance. And we have a wonderful panel here today as well to share with you what they wish they knew when they were interns and students like all of you. So actually, I will introduce them just to let you know who everyone is. And of course, you can read their bios learn a little bit more about them as well on the Leading Edge website, which we'll post in the chat as well. So first we have Roger Hiyama. He is the EVP of Solutions and Innovation at Wiland. We have Elizabeth Palmisano, who is the Associate Director of Audience Strategies at the Nature Conservancy. We have Eliot Dreiband, who is the Creative Project Manager with M&R. We have Reczek, who's the Senior Vice President of Development at the ALS Association. And we have Rose Richtmyre, who is the Account Coordinator with K2D Strategies. So welcome to our panelists. We're so glad to have you here. And what we'll do is we will ask that you just keep your phones muted and add your questions to the chat box at any time throughout the webinar, including any comments. So we might ask you some questions along the way, or if you have comments about things, feel free to post those in the chat. And we will open up and to answer your questions at the end of the webinar. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started, just to jump right in. The first discussion, I broke it up into a few topics. So first, we're going to talk about what I wish I knew about the nonprofit industry. And I'm going to start with Ryan. If you can tell us, how did you end up in this industry and why did you choose this industry?
Sure. Thanks, Shelby. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I ended up, I would say maybe a little bit on accident in the nonprofit sector. I, in college, was asked to step in and help organize a student fundraising event for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And I had done a lot of volunteer work, but I'd never done any sort of fundraising like that. And I caught the bug and realized maybe this was something I wanted to do. I was a communications major, thought I was going to go into marketing. And when I spent a year working on this event and then ultimately interning for St. Jude, I realized, oh, I can make money doing this. And so it was again, it was kind of an accidental, fun way that I ended up there. I found that my co-curriculars in a lot of ways led me down the path to a career in service to others, as opposed to working in the for-profit sector.
Awesome. Now, Rose, you had a similar start, I believe, volunteering at school. If you want to share with us how you got into the industry.
Yeah, so I also kind of fell into this on accident. I started getting into nonprofit fundraising after I took a job in my university's development office. Didn't really know what it was, but I needed a job and it was offered to me. And I learned, all about fundraising. And I graduated in 2020. So as you can imagine, a great time to find a job. And so at the time I was thinking maybe leaning towards higher ed fundraising, but at the time, all the universities in the DC area were on a hiring freeze, unfortunately. So I kind of took a shift and switched into more direct mail fundraising and marketing, and it's great.
Wonderful. So this kind of it's similar to, I feel like, how you figured out, or how you figure out which paths to take and what your career options actually are. And some people, like you all mentioned, may just kind of ended up in it, or you discovered it through different things you were doing. But Elizabeth, you also had a story about how you discovered that this could be a career option for you. How about you share with us what you learned about that?
Sure. I did not know that it existed at this level, and I actually found my first internship on Craigslist for a job with an awards program for an association called ASAE. And that was where, one, I found some other job websites besides Craigslist to find nonprofit opportunities. And two, was able to grow within that organization after my internship because of the connections and the networking I was able to do during the internship.
Awesome, awesome. We looking for Roger. He's not here right now, but anyone else want to share with how they kind of came into this? Any one of our other panelists, feel free to jump in about how this became a career option for you.
I'll say that, oh, sorry, Eliot, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'll say that I didn't think about building a network as something that would lead to a job. I thought the only things that would lead to a job would be like on the ground experience. And more, I learned that the connections were just as powerful as like boots on the ground, years in the field.
Yeah, so true, so true. And I would say a lot of people might say that's part of why you might not even consider the nonprofit industry sometimes, is that there tend to be some myths and conceptions about working in the field. So Eliot, I want to start with you. What are some myths and conceptions about not just nonprofit, but about nonprofit versus for-profit? And how did you kind of dispel those myths?
Sure, absolutely. So I knew that I wanted to work in
Ellie, I think we just lost you a little bit. Your reception's choppy. Hey, Elliot.
And even my idea of like social work was very limited. And so I immediately worked in nonprofits, which was fine and great, and I loved it. But I also think that like there wasn't a very good understanding, and granted this was a little bit earlier when there wasn't as exciting of an opportunity in the social impact sector as there is now. But I would say that try not to look at it as a binary, that nonprofits is the helping field, that for-profits is the not helping field. It's really so much more of an integrated space than there used to be. There's B Corps, there's social enterprises, there's socially focused businesses, there's so I'm currently working at M&R Strategic Services. We just call it M&R, but I'm trying to make it a little bit more fully professional on this call, but M&R. And so we are a for-profit technically, but all we do is help campaign communication strategy, fundraising strategy, marketing for nonprofits and unions. So I'm able to get almost all of the great benefits of for-profit and the big companies and these kind of things, but also my entire client. It's not like I'm not working with the people I wanted to work with. It's a little bit more far removed than the people who are on the ground or even in the individual industries. I'm working with Elizabeth's or Ryan's or Rose's or whoever's the person or the client on the individual nonprofits, but it's very exciting. It's a really interesting world. And I just would kind of look at what skills you have personally and then try to see how they fit in this new sector. Because additionally, I just also don't think you have to be a one issue kind of person. I am not a one issue person. I thought working in nonprofits, you kind of had to have a cause, a driving thing that made you matter or more passionate than ever before. There's a lot of things in the world right now. I don't know how anyone is supposed to pick one thing. And even at my current job, they're like, what clients do you want to work with? And I'm like, pick your top 5. Top 5? How are you supposed to say no to the environment or something? It's not really, but there are jobs out there. I think Rose is probably in one too, or my M&Rs. I get to work with a whole range of clients, going from international development to something a little bit more environmental to more unions. So it's very, find what works for you and then know that you can make the job market what it is. It might take a little bit more work and a little bit more agency on your part because there isn't one career that I know I want. I know I'm going to probably build it as I go, but stay open-minded and passionate about what brings you to this field.
Very good advice. And funny you mentioned Rose. Rose, you also had mentioned some misconceptions that you heard. Why don't you jump in there as well?
Yeah, so I think one of the big misconceptions I've heard about the nonprofit industry is kind of the term overworked and underpaid. Um, at least in my experience, I also don't work directly for a nonprofit. Technically, I work for a for-profit and we help nonprofits. But what I've seen from friends who work for nonprofits, they're paid pretty well in comparison to their for-profit peers. It's pretty comparable. And most of them also have very good work-life balances. Just even a couple of weeks ago, me and a couple of friends who work for nonprofits, we were all working from home at the beach. So I think less so these days, nonprofits aren't so much the overworked and underpaid kind of stereotype that they used to be. You can definitely make a good living working for a nonprofit.
Yes, very good point. I think one of the other things that makes it unique is how it ties to volunteering. And welcome, Roger. Glad that you're here with us.
And sorry, I had a hard time getting logged in, but I'm here now. So
That's okay. Good timing too, because I wanted to ask you to share with us what you've learned about the benefits of volunteering in this sector.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple things. I'm going to take you back to a story that actually happened back in my freshman year in college. And I was midway through my first semester. I was a little disgruntled. I'd had a chance to go to one school, went to a different school on a scholarship. And I went home in October and I told my mom, I'm not sure if this is me. I'm cut out for this. And the best piece of advice she ever gave me was get both feet in. And by both feet in, she says, I was kind of straddling the fence. I had 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And she says, go back, get committed, get both feet in. And I did that. And had a great rest of the semester, and the rest of my college career was easy and much better. But to me, getting both feet in means doing more than what's expected of you. And so I think volunteering, whether it be on a local community basis or volunteering within the industry in a trade association like the Nonprofit Alliance, those things, the opportunities are plentiful. But the key thing is it gets you committed in different ways than if you weren't volunteering. And by committed, I think it opens up doors and opportunities that don't exist unless you get exposed to the volunteer process.
Yeah, very, very good points. Eliot, you also mentioned some things that you learned about different ways to volunteer. And I thought you made a good point when we talked about that it doesn't look the same. Like, for instance, going to, how you mentioned online volunteering, especially after, we've gone online for everything. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, absolutely. And I can also bring in Alyssa's question about working in art and design as well. There are so many ways to volunteer online now. And before the COVID, they were already trying to get skilled volunteers to do short projects. So there's lots of organizations like Spark Academy. There's lots of organizations where you can volunteer to do little one-off graphic design projects. I was doing that during grad school as a way of feeling like I was volunteering, because even though I knew I couldn't have the extra energy, I could sit in bed and watch TV and then knock out some projects for them. And that's really helpful for nonprofits to be able to get skilled labor and support without having to maybe necessarily onboard anyone, having to take their own personal time. And then after COVID, I feel like there were a lot more exciting volunteer opportunities. One of my big nonprofits that I volunteered for pretty much my whole life was Paul Newman's Serious Fun camps across the country. I worked in the California one, and when COVID, these are all camps for kids with medical conditions, and so COVID made it even more hard to get people in person, and so they started doing camp counselor sessions online and these kind of activities that I would run campfires quote unquote, on my Zoom session from like my own couch and hang out with a bunch of kids who I had either met before or not, but I was giving the parents some time to relax. I was bringing the kids back into this, good community and bringing in some like helping them make connections with their peers. And it's just, there's a very, I wouldn't see things as black and white as old volunteering was. I'm currently looking, I'm in Los Angeles, and I found that there's water drop volunteering. So I know that I can't do very long volunteer stints, just personally for my own schedule right now, but I know that every Sunday they are looking for people to help, drop off water in different parts of the hottest parts of Los Angeles. And I know I can do that for 2 hours once a week. And they don't make it come every week. So it's like, even just find what works for you, and know that there are a lot of ways to get, if you're shy, if you're not 100% sure what you're comfortable doing yet, try out different ways. I tried phone banking for a while when, during the elections. That was not for me. That makes me very stressed. I thought, oh, it's just on my couch, I can chill and get a lot of stuff, feel very productive. I felt productive. I also felt extremely overworked and tired. So just, pivot, find what works for you, and know that there are a lot of opportunities out there. And if you can't see one, make one up.
So true. Yes. I love that. I love that. So let's move on to what I wish I knew about career planning. In my discussions with all of you, everyone, you all had great things to say about finding a mentor. So I just want to start with you, Ryan. What do you wish you knew, or what did you learn about finding a mentor?
Yeah, I've had, I'd say 2 mentors throughout my career. The first one, my first job. So when I did that fundraising event for St. Jude that got me into this, I ended up turning that into a job overseeing that program nationwide. And I moved to Memphis, Tennessee. I grew up in Pittsburgh, so it was a whole change. I didn't know anyone. And my boss's boss kind of took me under her wing. She had also moved to the city from elsewhere. And we quickly became not only friendly, but she was a really good guide for me in terms of what next steps I should be thinking about, when I should make a move, when I should try to get onto a task force or something like that. So she was really good at providing those opportunities. When I left that role, we stayed in touch. She continued to be a reference for me, and was somebody who I was really engaged with. And then a little later in my career, as I progressed and moved up, another manager of mine, she's my current mentor, somebody that I talk to on a regular basis. We haven't worked together in years, but she's the one I know I can pick up the phone and say, hey, I've got a problem, or I've got a situation here, and I just need somebody who's not in the organization to hear this out and tell me if I'm crazy, tell me if you think this is a good idea, just give me your feedback. And so she's been, her name's Cynthia, and Cynthia continues to be somebody that I have really entrusted with my career planning and thinking about the future. She's been an SVP for a very long time, and I just recently stepped into the role of an SVP. So I've made it. I've become Cynthia in some ways. I've followed her guide and her guidance, I should say. And it's been really great knowing that you've got somebody who has your back, who just wants to see you succeed and wants to help you along the way.
Love that. Roger, I'm going to go to you too. You made a really great observation, or gave a lesson that you learned about finding a mentor, and something that we all mistakenly tend to think about the process of finding a mentor. So why don't you share with us what you learned about that?
So one of the things, how do you find a mentor? It's easy and it's not sometimes. But the one key thing is you should know that anybody that is senior to you at some point has an inkling or a desire to help out somebody that's just starting out. And many times finding a mentor is just starting a conversation and begin developing somewhat of a relationship. When I look back at the mentors that I've had, they've all been leaders and bosses that I've had in companies. And part of the lesson is, know that there's somebody, including your current boss or supervisor, who wants to mentor. they want to help somebody that's starting out accelerate their careers in ways that they may have or may have wanted to. And now they're in a position to where they can help. And I think, one of the key things is when I look at my career, I've really, and I tell this to our younger staff, you need to really be the CEO of your career, right? So don't expect somebody to come hand you something. We're not in a game where everything's given to you. As a CEO of your career, you need to kind of map out and plan different things. And one of the best things that you can plan on is developing relationships that you can carry forward moving in the future. So Ryan, your example of your mentor, Cynthia, is a great example. My current boss was also my boss 40 years when I started in the industry. And I left him for 25 years, but throughout my career, I would always touch base with Phil. And even as I was contemplating other job changes, I would call Phil up and I would ask him what he thought. And the beauty is you create these relationships that don't exist anywhere else. And it helps to have a sounding board because it's easier when you have experience on your side, and the experience comes in the form of a mentor.
Great, great. Very good lesson learned. Let's also jump to, I think a big part of career planning is measuring success. And Rose, you said something I think that a lot of our attendees can relate to when it comes to measuring success. Why don't you share with us what that was?
Yeah, so like most of you, I too grew up in the age of social media. I think Instagram came out when I was 13. And so one, especially as you're looking for a job, one big social media is LinkedIn. And this is kind of the first time in your life where you're not on the same trajectory as all of your peers. You're no longer moving, you're not going up a grade every year with them. So at this point, everyone is kind of scattering on different paths, and it can feel very scary, and it can make you feel like I'm doing something wrong. It looks like everybody's moving on, getting jobs, getting married, having kids, whatever, and I'm not. What's wrong with me? When that's not really the answer. They're not posting, yeah, I applied for 250 jobs and only heard back from 3. So just keeping in mind that at this point, moving forward, everybody is on different paths. You're no longer all going together, and don't get sucked into the LinkedIn hole of, oh my God, everybody's moving on and getting jobs, and why haven't I heard back from any? So just, that don't measure your success based on what your peers you've grown up with are posting on social media, because I guarantee you they're not posting all the bad things that are happening behind the scenes that you've also experienced.
Very good advice. It applies to all levels of our careers because we're all on social media. Awesome. Let's jump to the next section on what I wish I knew about school. So starting with, I'm going to start with you, Elizabeth, on what you wish you knew about choosing the right school or major.
Sure. So for that, I had a very specific vision when I was 17 years old that planned out the next 50 years of my life. And that was, I am going to this school because it has the best nursing program in the country, and that's it. I'm done. And what I learned was that is not the case, and no one should make that kind of decision when they're so young. And there was a moment where I freaked out because this path that's like conveyor belt, like Rose was mentioning, like grade 1, grade 2, it's no longer there. And I had to take a minute and think about what I truly wanted or what I didn't know that I was going to do, and pause. And it was uncomfortable for me. And it was also uncomfortable for like my family, because they were like, you have a plan. You're supposed to do this. You're supposed to do this. So I think with that, just knowing that it turned out the way it was supposed to, and you really shouldn't be picking the next, decades of your life when you have no idea what's out there.
So true. Ryan, you also had something something to share on that as well. Why don't you jump in there?
Sure. Yeah. When we talked about this, Shelby said, do you think that there's a major that you need to think about, or what is it that you need to get out of your college experience to get into the nonprofit sector? And I was a communications major, and I had always kind of known that's what I was going to go into. Like I said earlier, I thought I was going to go into marketing, and that changed quickly. But for me, what I've realized over my time in the nonprofit sector is it doesn't really matter what your major is. People come from all different backgrounds. For me, what was most important in college, it's kind of twofold. And it was one is just learning those critical thinking skills, those softer skills, not the knowledge that you get from a major, but more of the how to work in an environment, to collaborate with people, to think through a problem. Those are the skills that I think are really more important generally in your career. Unless you're going to be an engineer, you probably need to learn how to be an engineer. But in this kind of a field, I think that there's a little more flexibility. The other thing that I think is important is getting involved in co-curriculars. I think I actually took a lot more away from my co-curriculars than I did from my actual classes in some ways, especially for where I ended up in my career. I shared with Shelby that my first job out of college, I was one of 135 people that had applied, and I got down to the final 5, and I was the only one that didn't have career experience. So I hadn't been in the workforce. I graduated, and I was trying to get this job. And when I got hired, my manager told me that I beat out people who had 10 years of experience because they had no leadership experience. And he was looking for somebody who knew how to take on a project or work with a group of people and lead them in the right direction. And so for me, I think it's those co-curriculars and those soft skills. Those things are really so important to your success in the long term, whether you stay in the nonprofit sector or elsewhere. So just taking those opportunities and really running with them when they present themselves.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I think Rose, you had something to say also about that. Why don't you share with us about choosing the right school or major?
Yeah, so I, much like Elizabeth, actually went to American University because they had the best, or one of the best, international affairs programs. I was going to go work for the UN and change the world. And after one semester, I was like, no, this isn't for me. And in realizing, I didn't want to do international affairs, I truly had no idea what I wanted to do. And after, talking to my parents and a couple other people, I kind of got the consensus of, if you're getting a liberal arts degree, your major isn't the end all be all. So I majored in criminal justice. I don't work in criminal justice, but a lot like Ryan said, it's a lot more about marketing yourself. I did a lot of writing in college. By the end, I rarely took, multiple choice tests. All I was doing was writing essays. So I know how to write, and I marketed myself. I know how to write. I know how to edit. And, I hate to say it, but life is a group project. And I think all your professors have probably told you life is a group project every time you complain about being in a group project. So, something like that. Yeah. Being able to lead people through a group project, being able to work collaboratively with others is something that's really important, something you can definitely market yourself towards getting into the nonprofit industry or any other job with a liberal arts degree. It's not so much what you learn, but how the experience you learn from it.
Exactly. So what about going back to school to get, advanced degrees, get your master's? I'll start with you, Eliot, because you had some really good pointers on that, on going back to school.
I went back to school in 2018, about 6 years after I graduated undergrad, and then graduated in 2020. So fun to go back to school and then have it all fall apart. But I am really glad I waited to go back to school. I knew there wasn't a one career path / master program that was going to be good for me. So I knew I needed to kind of get some experience under my belt so that I could kind of do some of the weed work ahead of time. Graduate programs are really good at getting you, you shouldn't use them to find out what you want to do. You should already know what you want to do when you go back to grad school. So I'll say that I had some fresh out of undergrad colleagues. Were they really smart? Yes, absolutely. Did they have a lot to add to the conversation? Not so much. And that is not to say that they weren't going to do great things, but we just all the people who had gone back to work before coming back to grad school, they did have other things, and it was such a huge age range of grad school. It's not, we had 23-year-olds and we had 60-year-olds, so you're not going to sound dumb, but you're just going to sound like you're inexperienced, and we want you to be able to bring the more things you can bring from outside the classroom into the classroom is how you're going to make the most of your grad school experience, because it is about networking. Grad school is really about networking, finding extra mentors, finding your future colleagues. I found a program at USC it's technically in the social work school, which is I don't want to be a therapist. That was not for me, but what they do is they do macro social work, which is organizational government, how to work at the intersection of corporate social responsibility. That was what I was interested in. And so if I would not have chosen that career or that grad school path right after undergrad. I would have said, there's no way, I'm not a social worker. I don't want to do anything with social work. That's like, I'm interested in social impact, sure, but like, that wasn't for me. And I have friends do the same thing with their MBA, and like they wish that they had kind of had a little bit more time to figure out what is the best school for this intersection of what I want to do. It's not just about the teachers. It's not just about the program. It's about the teachers, the program, what you have, what you're bringing to it. It's a really big investment, guys, like really big investment. You're either going to go into debt, or your parents or someone in your family is going to lose a lot of money. Like we're not the PhD of science people who are going to get everything funded for us. So it's like, really make sure you know yourself up better for your future bills.
Yes, it's a part of your financial planning. That is a good point. Roger, why don't you share with us, because you had an interesting pathway to get to where you are. You're now at the executive level, but you never went back to school, right?
No, I didn't. And in fact, it's interesting. I've always been great in math and science, but I chose a field of study which was not math and science based. I was an economics and political science major in college. And I've been working in the data field really from when I graduated from college. And, when I was a junior in college, I still had thoughts of maybe going on to law school or going and getting a master's in public administration. I always thought I might be a city manager somewhere, but as school drew on and whatnot, I was pretty much done with school by my senior year. I wanted to get out and kind of sow my oats. And it was through a networking relationship that I joined a company out of college, and it was a small company at the time. And I was kind of the first college recruiting class that the company had ever embarked on. And so I was given opportunities at a fairly young age in a smaller company that was a lot of education on how business worked. And over the years, there just was never a real good time for me to go back to school and get an MBA. And I even looked at doing like an executive MBA program where I could do it on weekends. And the reality is I never did. And I don't know what I missed. I do know, though, that in the positions I've been in throughout my career, I've been exposed to a lot more things in a more a faster learning environment. And so I kind of think that, I got my senior level executive management experience through trial and fire. And, but, I think today is probably different than it was in 1982 when I graduated from college. I think that some employers look for an advanced degree, and others are really looking for somebody who has more experience. It's interesting. A few weeks ago, I was talking with some colleagues in the industry, and these were owners of agencies, and they said, we're going to start hiring directly out of college because that's not the way we've normally been. We've always looked for somebody with 1 or 2 years of experience. But because of the way the job market is and the lack of qualified talent, they've really been starting to recruit more students straight out of college. So I know that things are different now. Whether an advanced degree as an MBA is better than a bachelor's degree starting out, I couldn't tell you. I don't know if any of the other panelists have any thoughts on that, but I'm an example of somebody that did not go and get a master's degree. But I don't think I've suffered as a result of it.
Great. Yeah, I think it's a prime example of the fact that there are just different paths, different ways to get to where you got to go. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Okay, well, let's move on to what I wish I knew about life after school. And starting with one discussion I had was with Ryan about making and spending money. And Ryan, share with us your story, which I can relate to, that you shared with me.
Yeah, there are two pieces of advice I wish somebody would have given me, or maybe somebody would have redirected me on. Number one is, as soon as you get that first job, start contributing to your 401k. Just put money away for retirement. I know when you're in your early 20s, it just seems so far away, but I don't know. I sometimes don't know what happened the last 20 years. How did I get to be 41 all of a sudden? And I feel behind on it. So I especially if they're offering a match of any sort, you're just leaving money on the table. So you'll never miss it if you just start putting it away initially. But I think the other piece of advice, or maybe advice I wish I would have ignored, was in 2007, I bought a house, which was the peak just before the market crashed in 2008, 2009. And I bought a house that had no kitchen. It literally had a big empty room with a gas pipe sticking up out of the floor. The bathroom needed to be completely gutted and redone. And I took on all the expense because everyone said, it's really expensive, but just go ahead and do it. And you put the extra money in, and you're going to make so much money. Well, then the market crashed, and I was saddled with that house for 7 years. And it actually kind of held me back in my career because I couldn't leave Philadelphia. I had some opportunities I was living in Philadelphia at the time. I had some opportunities that had presented themselves in other parts of the country, but I couldn't afford to pay for a house in Philadelphia and move somewhere else. And my gut had always told me I shouldn't have bought that house, but everyone was like, do it, you'll make so much money, because everyone was making money. So my advice to you is follow your gut on finances as well. If something feels like it's too good to be true, it might be. And so make decisions that are good for you, and that will, it could have been that if the market never crashed, I would have made all that money, and no one knew that the market was going to crash, but it did. And I think that I know there are opportunities I missed as a result of that. So listen to your gut.
Very good lesson. Rose, you also have had good advice as well. And again, I think a lot of you can probably relate to this. So why don't you share with us what you said about making and spending money?
Yeah. So one thing I would put. Oh, am I breaking up? My video is.
I still hear you.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So one thing that I did that I would advise people to do, as much as you might groan when you hear this, because I definitely did, is if you can live with your parents after graduating from college. I would. I lived with my parents for a year. It wasn't necessary. I didn't necessarily plan to live with them for a year. It was more so I lived with my partner, and he didn't have a stable job, but he works in politics, so he didn't have a stable job at the time. So we weren't looking to go get a lease, and in 3 months he might not have a job. Luckily that never happened, but so we both decided to move back home with our parents for the time being, and I saved a lot of money. I paid off a lot of my student loans, because there's no interest on student loans right now, at least if you have them through the government. So I paid off a nice chunk of that. And yeah, I saved a lot of money in comparison to what I'm saving now, because now I'm paying rent and utilities and for my own groceries, and gas is expensive right now. So if it's feasible, if your parents live within the area you want to work, if it's a healthy environment for you to be in, you're not gonna, if they're not gonna drive you absolutely up the wall, if it's a sacrifice you can make, I would recommend it. Basically, it's the long story short.
No, I completely agree. I did the same thing, and it was best decision I made. So what about so another thing I think we all face after school is making mistakes and facing setbacks. And Elizabeth, you had a good story that you shared about dealing with setbacks. So why don't you share that with us?
Sure. And I know we talked a little bit about the conveyor belt earlier and what it feels like to get off of it. And I think the advice I would give to myself is that it's going to feel different when you have a job and you're no longer living on campus and you're surrounded by different people, or maybe you're missing friends, or you're feeling lonely or stressed out about budgeting. that's normal. And no one told me that it was normal to need to work through how to make a budget or need to figure out what I'm going to eat every night. And so give yourself grace to be like, oh, like this is uncomfortable, but my 20s are supposed to be uncomfortable and you'll get through it and it'll be fine. So that was a big learning that I wish I knew.
Yes, yes. And because of time, we'll move on to the next one. But before that, Eliot, you had like literally a couple of words that you said for what you learned or advice when you're facing setbacks. Do you know what I'm talking about? You said spin it like a PR agent. Remember that?
Oh, yes. I'm so
and
clever.
I love that. So I just wanted to say that.
I say such smart things sometimes. Yes, spin it like a PR agent. Things are going to happen. You're not going to get the job you want. You're going to realize that you totally invested in something, like that you wanted this job. It ended up being a nightmare. So many people I know found their dream job only to find it be like miserable in this other regard because something else happens. Spin it. Like, find a situation and kind of move forward, and then find ways to talk about it, make it like you're doing, because that's what everyone is doing. And bring that, and it makes us all better and more creative and more flexible to move throughout life is going to only do good things for your career, because I think it's when people get stagnant and stuck is when you get frustrated with many things that can happen in your life. So yeah, find ways to, and I think I find social media a good example of how people have been able to spin their things. I was going to join the Peace Corps after college. I was like 100% sure about it. And then I found out that they have like a 35-page document about things you cannot have medically before you join the Peace Corps. So I had to spin it. And like, you find other things that make it work. And like, I volunteered in Argentina. It was perfect for me. Like I found my own way of doing it, but it will take a second of like realizing that it sucks. Hold space for that suckage. Your life is not going to turn out exactly how you want, but it's going to be better because of that. Like, no one's life, from Elizabeth at 17 saying she's going to go to nursing school to like, we're all so in different places, every single one of us on this call, than we thought we'd be. And all of us are happy with our choices. So know that everything is temporary, and the good and the bad, and that we're just going to keep going.
Love it. Love it. Good advice. And you have the best like little phrases too. I love it. Okay, so one of the other things that everyone faces during school and after school, but especially after school, is making big decisions and getting out of your comfort zone. And a lot of our panelists touched on that, how things are just way different than what you're used to, and you gotta do things that you weren't used to. And Ryan, why don't you share with us what you've learned about making those big decisions and just getting out of your comfort zone?
Yeah, sure. After school, I moved to Memphis, Tennessee. I mentioned that earlier. I grew up in Pittsburgh, so it was culture shock. I moved from the Northeast to the Deep South, and I'm so glad I did it. I learned pretty quickly that, no offense if anyone's from Memphis, it was not the place for me. And so, I was lucky that I had people on my side that I worked with, that mentor I mentioned earlier, who helped me to find ways to stay with St. Jude at that time, but to leave Memphis and go out and work in other field offices. But it was not my favorite experience, but I'm glad that I did it. It I think did a lot to help me figure out who I was as an adult leaving college. But I think in addition to that, I am gay. And I did not come out to people when I moved to Memphis. I was a little terrified of the idea. Keep in mind, this was 2003, so it's a little different than it is today. But very conservative. A lot of people I worked with, there was a lot of conversation about what church I would join and things like that. And there's just this piece of me that I was like, I don't feel comfortable talking about this. And in the long run, I really wish I would have just told people, because I stayed in touch with a lot of them and they ultimately did find out, and no one cared. And so I think for me, I wish I would have been more authentic for myself in my first job and let people know who I was. as opposed to keeping a part of my life kind of separate and away from them. But all in all, it was a really great learning experience spending 2 years in Memphis, Tennessee, both in learning who I was, but also realizing that I need to just be out there and out in front and tell people who I am. And I'll share just as a side note to that, I now am very intentional when I interview that I mention my husband. Not a big deal, but I want people to know up front so they can make that decision. If that is going to be an issue for them, then they have the information and they can make that decision for themselves and for their company. But my husband also works in the nonprofit sector. He's the CEO of a small nonprofit that works nationwide, and we're both very intentional about making sure people know that we're married and that it's not a big deal. So that would be my guidance and advice there about finding yourself.
Love it, love it. Great. So I think we're at the point where we want to open up for questions. My colleague Abby Graff is helping out today, by the way, as well. So Abby, are there anyone you want to call on to ask their question out loud?
There were a couple things that came up, but I think that they mostly got answered in the chat. A little bit of questions about connecting with colleagues virtually when you end up in an entirely virtual place. And I think this could be an interesting one to talk about a little bit, partially because I don't spend so much time on the student end. I spend a lot of time with staff who are running these nonprofits, and they are also trying to figure out how to onboard new staff in a way that connects them. They feel connected to the new staff, and the new staff feel connected to them. So maybe a little conversation around how do you connect to colleagues, or what could someone do at a new job to help get to know their colleagues?
Yeah, so any one of our panelists, feel free to jump in on that and answer that.
I'll jump in real quick. I put this in the chat, but I'll just explain a little bit more. So when the pandemic started, we went remote. And so I was intentional. In the beginning, it was every day we would meet for 30 minutes at the beginning of the day, and we call it the team huddle. Now it's down to 2 times a week we do it because we're all still, for the most part, remote. We see each other in person a little bit more frequently, but mostly working from home. And the team huddle is designed to be 15 minutes of updates. So we kind of just go around to the leadership and they give updates on what's happening with their teams. And then the final 15 minutes is really, we pose a question of the day. And so whoever gets the question for that day asks it, we go around and everyone answers the question, and then they get to pick the next person who's got the question. I know it sounds silly, but it has been an amazing way to stay in touch with all of the people that I work with, because we would often eat lunch together when we were together. And now that we're remote, this is our way of kind of being silly. And the questions are all over the place. What would your superpower be? What's your favorite movie? Things that you would uncover by having that one-on-one time with somebody in person that we don't get the opportunity to do as much when we're doing things through Zoom. So I highly encourage that you bring a team huddle to wherever you go to work and get the question of the day instituted. And I know it sounds silly, but people love it.
Yeah, I agree. So one of the things during the pandemic, and I work in a company with about 250 people, but I work in a satellite office that has about 14, 15 people. And we intentionally tried to get together outside of the office during the pandemic. And we would meet in a park and have a lunch. We had potluck one time. We brought in kava another time. But we intentionally tried to find ways to where we could be face-to-face and in person, albeit once every 3 or 4 months. And it's those little things that are really important. I think the saddest part of the pandemic is just missing out on the human interaction, because, it's important is in work. And even now, we're, as a company, we give our employees the opportunity to come in every day, come in on a hybrid basis, or don't come in at all. And, we still have the huddles, as what Ryan had mentioned, but we've really tried to target Tuesday as the day that if we're going to go into the office, that's the day to be in. And we've had, 70% of our staff in the office on a Tuesday. And then, we'll create little social things to do. A few weeks ago, there was a new diner that opened up in Alexandria. And we walked over to the diner and, we played games with the jukebox. that was in the diner. It's just all those kind of silly things that Ryan mentioned. But, you know, a big part of work is the human interaction, and anything you can do to get back to some semblance of either face-to-face or where it's not all serious work. I think that's important.
Nice. Any other questions, Abby?
I don't see any. If I'm missing any, and Alyssa, you had asked that question. If you wanted to come off of mute, did that answer your question or add into the chat? Did that, or did you have more specific nuances to it? I'll pause in case you want to, or if anybody else wants to. I would ask a question for participants if they're there. And again, if you're willing to come off or say this, if you're in an internship, I know a couple people on the call are currently this summer in internships with nonprofit organizations or within the nonprofit sector. If you have specific questions or if what you've been hearing today reflects what you've been seeing in your internship. And if everybody's there, Rachel, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So first of all, thank you all for the helpful insight. I am doing a summer internship right now. I'm working for the Volunteers of America. I work in their health equity department. I'm about to graduate in little time, actually a month. I'm very excited. So I was just gonna ask a question if that's okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
So basically, you know, I'm actively applying to jobs, and I wanted to gain your all's perspective on how you think I should go about standing out, because, you know, I imagine I'm going against people that have more advanced degrees than me, perhaps more work experience. And, you know, I'm doing all the things, I'm doing LinkedIn, constantly updating my resume, cover letter, but I just wanted to see if anyone had like a helpful tip or tool.
And then I'm going to piggyback on this, Rachel, because in the chat, Alyssa was just saying, how do you know if you should go to grad school? And I feel like that ties into what you're saying. So maybe
for sure.
go together.
So, I'd like to answer part of your question with a statistic. 85% of all jobs are never posted. That was something that came out in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago. I want to give you a story about a friend of one of my daughters. She graduated in environmental studies and has been without a job for over a year. She was in that class of students where there were no internships during her junior and senior year of college. And so she didn't have the opportunity to do an internship. So she feels like she doesn't have the experience. Well, in this case, and in every case, I would say that the biggest challenge for anybody getting a job is getting their resume reviewed by somebody in the company. And I truly believe, you know, with all of these, the way hiring happens today, you're kind of at a disadvantage unless you have a network of people that can help you identify somebody at a company where they can walk your resume down the hallway or something like that. In the case of my daughter's friend, I reached out to her and I said, you know, if you want me to help you, I'd be more than happy to, because I know, you know, VP level people at every environmental organization in the country because of the work that we do. And I said, it won't be the person that you need to get to, but I can certainly get your resume reviewed. Well, sadly, she's not taken me up on that, but I truly believe that the key to getting your resume reviewed is having somebody create an inroad for you and to make your resume stand out.
I kind of want to.
In fact, I would go one step further, that every single one of the panelists here would be happy to interact with every one of you as you start making your career choices. And as you're looking for a job and you're in a particular type of field, just because I work in data and data science and prior to that, advertising and agency services. I've always been on the for-profit side, commercial, but I have more of a network in the nonprofit side than you could ever imagine. And again, I'm at that stage in my career where I desperately want to help younger people have an easier time entering the field than what I may have had.
I was gonna jump in based off Roger's statistic of 85% of jobs are never posted. The job I have now, I don't believe it was ever actually posted. I never saw it posted anywhere I looked. And I got my job now through I had an internship before it. This was in the summer of 2020. So only 2 years ago. My supervisor knew the two women that run the company I work for, K2D Strategies. And at the time they had pretty much the same position I have now, but on the digital side, I work on the direct mail side posted, and they had actually already filled it. They just hadn't taken the posting down. But anyways, we still connected. I still chatted with them. And then 2 months later, they had an opening. They were looking for an entry-level person on the direct mail side and came back to me and said, hey, we got this job. If you are interested, we'd love to talk to you more. And so they knew me. They pretty much already had a recommendation for me from my internship supervisor. So I think another thing is, if you're in an internship now and your next step isn't to go back to college, your next step is to go look for a job, let your internship supervisor know, because I'm sure they'll be happy to help you out and connect you with people who might have openings, or at least might have openings in the future that might never get posted. So.
Great advice. And I saw what you posted, Elizabeth, LinkedIn, connect with you guys on LinkedIn even, you know, the opportunities like this are ways to connect and network, and you never know where your next job could come from. So
Elizabeth also mentioned in one of her chat responses, how does she connect with people at work? She does little coffee chats. If you reached out to any one of us and asked us to do a coffee chat with you, we'd be happy to do it.
Mhm.
Shelby, real quick, I would like to just list this question about when do you know it's right to go back to school for a master's degree?
yes.
I'm getting mine right now. So I waited 20 years from when I graduated to go back, and honestly it has to do with what I'm working on, but it's not all that relevant at the same time. I'm getting my master's in public policy, which I do some advocacy work and funding, but I'm not taking classes related to that because I've been doing it for 20 years. So I'm just taking fun classes. So just as an example, last semester, I took funding terrorism, money laundering, and transnational organized crime, because they're topics that are of interest to me. And so that's what I'm getting my master's in, are things that I probably won't use in my professional career, but that make me feel like I'm going to continue to grow as a human being. So I think the answer to that question is when do you go back is when it's right for you.
Yep, exactly. And Eliot, I think you did you have something to say? I saw your mic come off.
Yeah, I would say, like, yes, everyone is very correct that it's great to know someone in the field or place you're applying to. You're not always gonna know anyone. You can do lots of cold calls and ask people to read, or knowing someone, and it's just not gonna help. It's gonna be disappointing, and then you're gonna try to pivot, like we talked about earlier. Find other ways of networking that might not be as direct as Roger or Rose were saying. Find community groups that are volunteering things. Don't write off volunteering, because that could be the person who then knows someone who could get you in. I started working on a blog, and it was just to show that I had skill in this thing. And granted, like, do I upkeep the blog in the way that I probably should? No, but like, it was a very big stepping stone and showing what I could do and what I wanted to do. And you guys are better at social media than probably all of us. So, like, just know that there are other ways of showing competency and skill in something, and you might not know where you can get connections from. So yes, Google has a secret, like, invite list that if you apply to Google on the regular Google links, you're never going to get in, and you need to go to these secret. Yes, those are absolutely true about certain jobs. However, you can also find backends that come from unlikely sources. Yay. Hi, Rebecca. Sorry, that was a direct message, but I'm very excited that you're moving to Los Angeles.
And Elizabeth, did you want to say something? I saw your mic was off, so okay. All right, well, we are a little bit over time, but not much. So I think we will wrap it up here. I want to thank each of our panelists. I think you guys were amazing. You gave some really great advice. You took me back in time because I related to almost everything you said. So thank you for doing this. And thank you all of you interns and students for attending today. And we'll keep you updated on any other upcoming leading edge events that we have. So thanks, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of the week. Bye.
Thank you.